morning. Welcome. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I am so glad that you are here with us this morning, even in the cold. Some of you know that Lisa and I just got back from New Orleans on Friday, so this morning I'll be reflecting on our time there and that city. So for our reading, I chose a reading by a friend of ours, Deanna Vanderveer, who had us over for dinner while we were there. She wrote this about a year after Hurricane Katrina. I have heard people say, if New Orleanians would just forget about Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest and second lines and football and put all that money and time into rebuilding, that city would be back together in no time. I don't know, maybe, but I know this, it wouldn't be New Orleans. Sure, we could build a city by the book with high rises and low hopes on streets with signs, but the soul of this place would be dead. And as wounded as our city is right now, her soul is alive, writhing and screaming in pain, yes, and alive and funky and jamming with love. Yes, there's a lot of pain here, because we're still alive and feeling, see? We aren't numb to life like people can get in suburbia USA with big box stores and 1.9 children and 4 hours of television watching a day on average. We are in the streets making music, on our front steps talking to our neighbors, in our dens and garages and attics creating creatures of wonder and fantasy out of garbage, feathers, and paper. We are hot gluing and hand beating new life out of the shredded fabric of this city. Our presence and our passion here, now, at this most broken point in many of our lives, is a living prayer, a testament to the strength of this city's intense spirit of life. Sometimes it is just too hard. The pain that comes with being open to the joy of life is just too overwhelming. Some people move away. Some people drink their way to numbness. But of the many that leave, many return. They find the sleepwalking souls of their new hometowns more frightening and incomprehensible than potholes that can eat cars whole and gunshots in the fog. Those who drink to oblivion wake up, eat a greasy po' boy, and get back to life, sheetrocking and zydecoing, painting and sainting. We will not work like machines and call it life. We are soul rebels, blues masters, and rhythm makers. We are going to celebrate the good and shout about the bad. We are going to breathe in and out for a reason and know what that reason is. We will not submit to a chorus of shoulds and shouldn'ts and fears and judgments. We are New Orleans, feeling and living the entire spectrum of life. Yes, that takes time and money and energy. Those are elements of a life truly lived. Does New Orleans have to change to survive? Of course. Every living thing must grow. The traditions of racism and classism that are deeply woven into the fabric of this city and of this nation must be pulled out and burnt. But there is a big difference between changing destructive social structures and destroying the traditions that have stitched this city together in soulful celebration across race and class and age again and again. Don't tell me we have to sell our city's funky soul if we want to build it again. Last week, I spent the week in New Orleans. Other than the plane ride down there, that is a whole sermon in itself. It was a wonderful vacation. New Orleans is an important city to me. I'm sure we all have those favorite cities and towns, places that we return to again and again. Maybe for you, it's your hometown. It's interesting to look back and think about all of the trips we have made to our favorite places, our touchstone places, to see how we have changed between trips, how the place itself has changed, and how the place has changed us. My trips to New Orleans can chart not only my life the past 10 years, but also my ministry. On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall in Louisiana. On September 1st, I began divinity school. Although I had never been to New Orleans before the storm, the city and its people quickly became an important part of my journey into the ministry. I felt called to go there to help, but in the end, the city and its people became my best teachers. They taught me about witness, about presence, about solidarity. They taught me about racism and classism, about social and economic disparity. They taught me about identity and resilience, about despair and celebration, about grief and play. New Orleans, almost as much as seminary, taught me the fundamentals of ministry. This latest trip to New Orleans also had its lessons, but more than anything else, it invited me to look back on all of my other trips, to think on how the city has changed and how I have been changed by it. Journaling was very important as I processed my experiences in New Orleans. So I revisited a number of my old journals as I prepared for this morning. Here's a journal entry from that September 1st, 2005. It starts, "First day of divinity school, we actually sang Kumbaya." Later in that entry, I wrote, "Part of what made today feel like I was in the right place was that throughout the day, we would take time out to pray for and keep in our thoughts all the victims of this hurricane, and also all the people in the other parts of the world who are suffering. It felt so right to, as a community, think of others rather than ourselves. I just hope that we also find some way as a community to help." A few days later, I continued to write about Hurricane Katrina and to wrestle with how our country was responding. I wrote in my journal, "People were without food or water for days. Violence erupted. People were stranded and desperate, and no one took charge. A civilian from Florida loaded up his RV with 400 meals and made it all the way to Louisiana. If he could do it, why couldn't the government?" And today, 2 policemen down there committed suicide. Witnessing all of that was just too much. I'm looking forward to church on Sunday to hear what the UUs are going to do to help, what I can do. In the end, I did find a way to become more engaged through my church. That spring, I signed up to go on a volunteer trip with them to New Orleans. May 7th, 2006. Today we had a meeting of volunteers who are planning on going down to New Orleans, and we were talking about what we could bring down that would provide any sort of comfort to the people there. One woman who has been down and is going back again told us that many people are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They're having trouble processing their feelings, and even mundane decisions can be overwhelming. She told us how difficult it is to ask them what they need or want, because deciding is just too much sometimes. Another woman in the group said that she knows what it's like to live with nothing, and that we shouldn't forget to bring things that will bring simple joys and pleasures, not just things that will meet basic needs, although those things too are necessary. So I was thinking about all this and decided that what I would like to bring is a suitcase full of journals. Journals are beautiful and can be such a powerful tool for healing. So I bought 2 today and plan to ask my friends and family for donations of journals so that I can bring them down. In the end, I collected almost 100 journals, enough for everyone in the UU congregation we would be working with. People in Boston were eager to take part in this gift, and I was overwhelmed by their generosity. I was also overwhelmed by the weight of 100 journals. And I had to ship most of them down there rather than carry them in my suitcase. My sister graciously donated the money to send them. It was a proud moment when I handed over the first stack of beautiful journals to the minister and told her to expect 90 more in the mail that week. Her reaction wasn't the gushing of gratitude I had unconsciously been expecting. We didn't sit down right there and plan a worship service around handing them out. I actually don't know if they were ever given out, or to who or how. It was one of my first lessons in volunteerism, actually. Don't get too attached to your own ideas about what will be helpful. Be guided by the people you are there for. Follow their lead, and don't expect them to follow yours. I'm still glad that I sent down all those journals. They were collected and given in love. And who knows, maybe they helped someone. Or maybe they collected dust in a corner. But I know more now about giving and receiving gifts during hard times. When my sister was so sick, we asked that friends and neighbors leave meals on the porch, because some days were too overwhelming even to say thank you. But we were so thankful. I continued to write in my own journal when I got home after that first trip. May 31st, 2006. I brought this journal down to New Orleans with me, but didn't write in it. I don't think I was quite ready to process all the things I was seeing and experiencing down there. Truthfully, I'm still not. I haven't cried yet, and yet I know the tears are in there. How could they not be? How could there not be a great big ocean of tears waiting to be released after all the things I've seen? But they haven't come up yet, haven't come out yet. I think while I was down there, my practical side took over and didn't allow myself to cry. Tears aren't practical on a construction site. Hammers and hard hats and sawzalls are practical. Dust masks and eye protectors and crowbars are practical. So these are the things I focus on, not the thousands of homes that sit destroyed and empty amidst the rubble, not the rows upon rows of FEMA trailers parked so close together you wonder how people get in and out, not the heartbreaking stories of evacuation and exile. That's what they say down there, when I was in exile. Instead, I just focus on the project at hand, a ceiling that needs to come down, metal pieces that need to be cut into 4-foot sections so that FEMA will take them away, a generator that needs more gas because, oh yeah, there's still no electricity 9 months after the storm. But really what keeps me going is focusing on the totally impractical, like trying chicory coffee for the first time, or posing for a picture in front of a Rosie the Riveter mural with my fellow female volunteers whose strength amazes me. I focus on Polly, the construction foreman from Brooklyn, who has donated 3 months of his life to come down here and get the church ready to rebuild, and who works on members' homes on the weekends. I try to be a mirror and not a sponge for people's grief, because like Polly says, we can't possibly hold all the grief there is down there. I focus on the delicious taste of my first beignet, so much better than a donut, and on the enormous red sun setting over the destruction of the lower Ninth Ward. I focus on the hymn we start singing because we are lost again in the van. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, whoa ya ya, whoa ya ya. And we laugh. It's dangerous to laugh because laughing might turn into crying, but we risk it every day. Sam puts an old map on his head and we snap a picture of his new dreads. We rename Lindsay Brick House. We tease Elizabeth about the mirror on her hotel room ceiling. She has the honeymoon suite. Rick uses a sawhorse as a dance bar. We compare blisters and bruises with pride. We wonder how much it would cost to change our plane tickets so that we don't have to leave. We feel useful there. We feel needed. We feel good. And as long as there is work to do, we don't feel sad. Yet. My second trip was harder. It was more than a year after the storm, and so little had changed. This was also the trip where I began to develop more fully an analysis of New Orleans with lenses of racism and classism. Our volunteer coordinator for that trip taught us about the emotional and political climate of the city and what we, a group of privileged white volunteers from the North, should and shouldn't do. I wrote this for a class when I got back, October 11th, 2006. Religious communities often hold up love as the motivating and sustaining emotion for their lives. It is this sense of love and respect for others that runs through so many Christian teachings as well as the 7 UU principles. It was love of my fellow UUs and my country that brought me to New Orleans a second time this past week. But this time coming back, my heart is full of something quite different. The love is still there, but what is brimming over is anger. I have never been so angry on such a large scale. So my question is, where is the room for anger in religion? Because right now more people need to be angry about the state of things in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, furious. Love will take you so far, but it feels like righteous anger has more power for change. My last trip, I saw the physical destruction of the storm, which was difficult to process, but the city was pretty empty then. The rubble and the flattened houses were sad, but nothing like what I witnessed this trip, people living in the destruction. Gutting a woman's house where she lived raising her grandson, and seeing thousands of houses that, like hers, have not been touched, even though it is more than a year later, made me so completely angry, I can't even process it. Why is it that volunteers need to gut those houses so that the owners who have nothing don't get fined? Where's the government, the National Guard? Where still was the neighborhood of the community center we helped to start to build? I have a feeling that this neighborhood, the 7th Ward, would probably have been almost as devastating before the storm as after. And people live there, and kids live there, and don't have schools to go to. And on this trip, I saw the kids. So yes, I can love them, and I do. But what good is that to them if I am not also angry, furious, that they are being ignored by the entire country? Maybe it's time to make anger a spiritual practice. While I was away this past week, I watched Reverend Christy Hardwick's wonderful sermon about lessons from the civil rights movement. She said that the greatest tool in standing against injustice is love. I needed that sermon back there in 2006, especially the part where she talked about the attraction of righteous anger as a substitute for love when doing justice work, and that it is, in the end, a poor substitute. That was another lesson New Orleans helped me to learn slowly. Of course, there is a place for anger in religion, but it should never take the place of love. My third trip was in March 2007. I took my best friend with me, and it was joyous. We were doing much more hopeful projects, and I could see the progress that the city had made since my last trip. We worked on a garden in the 7th Ward and on painting rooms in a church member's house that we had worked on both the previous trips as well. The owner, who has become a friend, said that it was the first time since the storm that it felt like home. I wrote in my journal, "So much more of the culture is back to drink in. I ate boiled crawfish and shrimp po' boys, drove to Mississippi to meet a handful of UUs there and hear their stories, put my feet in the Gulf of Mexico. We went to hear the Soul Rebels, my new favorite brass band. It was amazing. And even if I had just listened to the one old woman who told me her story in that storefront congregation in Mississippi, that would have made the whole trip worth it." On this third trip to New Orleans, we finally had a whole day off simply to enjoy the city. We got to see a collection of Impressionist paintings of women on loan to New Orleans by museums all over France. And then we drove on to the next stop on our journey, a healing labyrinth built after the hurricanes. I had always dreamed of walking a labyrinth, and as we drove, I envisioned high brick walls and rows of shrubs. I think it's because of that David Bowie movie, Labyrinth. We got lost, of course. Whoa, yeah, yeah. And when we finally saw the sign for the labyrinth, we burst out of the van, our eyes scanning the park, our spirits falling as they finally rested on a small, flat, brick and concrete design inlaid in the pavement. This was it. Trying not to look as disheartened as I felt, I approached the brick design. We had come all this way and might as well walk the labyrinth, such that it was. I can't even begin to tell you the transformation that took place on that walk. The path wound around and around, taking forever to trace foot over foot. The healing energy of the labyrinth was palpable, culminating at the center in a cloverleaf design where I stood, arms outstretched for what seemed like hours. Others joined me, and they too reached out their arms instinctively, like we were all being embraced by the healing energy of that labyrinth. I hadn't even realized how much I needed it. A man in a suit and tie made his way in as I made my way out, and I could only hope that on the journey he would find what I had found: deep peace and healing. When I got back to Boston, this is what I wrote: The Healing Labyrinth. Somehow we know, without being told, how to navigate this labyrinth. It's a familiar path to us, this universal path of grief. We slowly wind ourselves toward the center, losing ourselves in the task, tuning in and out to the world around us, steady on our course of tearfulness and longing. Others walk with us, and yet our wandering is solitary, circling in and out, taking our time to reach the center. Instinctively, we know we must stay there for a while, sit with our grief, allow it to wash over us, fill us up, empty us out. Allow ourselves to absorb the strength to start the journey again. digging ourselves out, hammering our way out, building our way out, walking the path of grief again in reverse. We slowly spiral toward the edge, so many times feeling it must be the end, and then being drawn back in toward the center. We feel the grace, but find no shortcuts to this journey, and so we continue on the path of healing, deferring to others as they make their way in, circling toward the center of their grief. And as we make our way out of our own, our hearts somehow are mended by the labyrinth, the path we have all walked together. I've returned to New Orleans nearly a dozen times. I hadn't been in a number of years, but this past week, as I said, Lisa and I spent the week there. Not to volunteer this time, but just to vacation, to catch up with old friends, to explore the city as it continues to evolve and thrive and struggle. We nearly wore out our shoes walking around. This trip, as with every trip, brought many lessons, gifts, and questions. The city feels almost whole again, although there are people and places missing that will never return, scars that are left that will never, I think, fully heal. There were more homeless people than I ever remember seeing. The crime rate is up. And we had to think a lot about personal safety, which I hadn't had to do before. And there were joys. We ate good food, danced to Zydeco music. My friends there are doing well. The church that we worked on for so many trips is growing, although most of the faces were new to me, and I missed some of the old ones. The whole city is readying itself for Mardi Gras. It's like they are wrapping the entire city of New Orleans in a green and purple and gold bow. Excitement is in the air. And we returned again to that healing labyrinth. I was grateful to walk it again. This time, as I made my way into the center on the circuitous path, I thought how much life is like a labyrinth. It's very hard to know when you are approaching the center or when you are getting to the end. You have to be content to know that you are on the path, that it is leading forward, that there are chances to loop back on where you have been. Being in New Orleans this week was a sort of homecoming for me. So I end with the words of the great jazz musician Wynton Marsalis, for whom New Orleans really is home. Marsalis doesn't like to fly, so after Hurricane Katrina, he drove all the way from New York City to New Orleans to participate in a reopening of the city celebration. In his opening remarks, he said, "It's good to be home in a time of crisis, because tough times force us to return to fundamentals, and there is nothing more fundamental than home." Amen, and blessed be. I know you're itching to sing Wo Ya Ya, so I'm giving you the opportunity. It's in your teal hymnal, number 1020. Please rise as you are able. Please join hands for our closing words. It's hard to know where we are on the path, if we are nearing the center or getting to the end. Sometimes it's good to take some time to look back on where we have been and to know wherever we're headed, we'll get there together. Go in peace.